In today's webinar, we are going to discuss about the applications and scholarships for admissions to top US law schools. And during the webinar, Niharika is going to share her experiences of applying to top US law schools, as well as her experience of studying in a top university, and also her life as a lawyer today at Dodd and Company. A little bit about Niharika. She has achieved a lot in her short career, but it is worth noting. So she is a pass out of OP Jindal Global University, Jindal Global Law School. After that, she completed her LLM from George Washington University. She has an experience of about 4 years of working in intellectual property rights. She's an associate lawyer at Dodd and Company. She focuses on all aspects of trademark, domain name disputes, unfair competition, brand protection, and trademark enforcement. She works on matters related to prosecution and opposition, including attending hearings at the Trademarks Registry and the IPAB. Prior to joining Dodd and Company, she was a fellow at one of the biggest organizations in the Bay Area. So, with this, I welcome Niharika for her opening remarks.
Hi everyone. I hope you're all well and safe and healthy. I'm actually really excited to be here and speaking to Shireen and Ashwati. Thank you for having me. It is a great pleasure to be here and speaking to people who once I was sitting there and wondering if I should apply for my master's. So this is a great platform. Congratulations to Shireen and Ashwati. Um, uh, so, I started with my LLM with a view that I wanted to get into academics. That clearly changed when I started practicing. Uh, but I think that masters is, I did masters after very careful consideration about what I want to do. So I think I hope to convey that, like what was my inspiration, what was my intention when I decided to do masters, and I think I will be able to cover that over this 1 hour
Yes, I
discussion.
think that would be lovely, Niharika, and we can't wait to hear about this. But before we get into that, I would like to introduce Cashel a little bit. So it's a committee for higher education, for academic support on higher education and learning, which has been instituted under the Office of the Dean at Jindal Law School, and we work in close collaboration with the Office of Career Services. So the purpose of this committee is basically to help advise and support those students of JGLS who aim at pursuing higher education in law and related disciplines. So, what you have already done is something that is so instrumental to our purpose at Cashel that we couldn't be more delighted to have you as a speaker today to share your personal experiences of having applied and securing some great admissions at distinguished universities abroad. Today, with us, we also have Ashwati Nair, who is my colleague at Cashel and also teaches at OP Jindal Global University, Jindal Global Law School. She's a discussant for today's webinar, and she'll be taking up questions towards the end of this webinar. The last 15-20 minutes we have reserved for questions. So we request the students to post their questions, all the attendees to post their questions on the chat, and we will certainly take them up towards the end of our discussion. So Niharika, you have had these exciting times abroad. I know LLM is not only about the academic experience, the rigor of academia and research, but it's also about experiencing a whole different world, especially coming from India. When you go to United States or UK or Australia or Canada, the cultural exposure is just humongous. So that is one of the considerations that everybody takes into takes into consideration when they're deciding which country that should they apply to. Not only the law school, but also the country that they're applying to becomes critical to their experiences henceforth. So, what do you think was a determining factor for you to apply to US law schools, and did you apply to other law schools as well? Because one can see that today the trend is towards Australia, Canada, UK, and even some European and German universities. So, what made you decide that US is the best destination to pursue an LLM, or did you apply to other universities, other countries as well? Over to you.
Thanks. So I did apply to other countries as well. But actually, I applied only to US and UK. I did not consider Australia or Canada at that time. Though in retrospect, I should have, but I didn't. Uh, I actually was pretty focused about what I want from my LLM and what area I wanted to specialize in. So that kind of like made my process of making a decision of where I want to go pretty narrow. In the sense that like I knew uh, that UK and US are like top countries for IP LLM. So that kind of did help. However, I like ultimately I did choose to go to a US university and not a UK university, and my consideration was again more towards the course curriculum and what they offered. So yeah, that
So those
was
were your considerations. I think those are valid considerations. Sometimes when one is shortlisting universities to apply for an LLM admission or scholarship, it becomes very difficult. And one consideration that you've already given our students here is that you have to look at the specialization and you have to look at the best faculty in the world and then apply to those law schools as opposed to the others. So what are the other considerations, Niharika, that one should keep in mind while shortlisting universities? Because the world is your oyster, you can go anywhere for your LLM. So how do you really pick and choose which university to apply to? Apart from the rankings, of course, what are some of the things and specializations? So we have covered two, rankings and specialization. So what are the other considerations that one should keep in mind while shortlisting universities? Because clearly that is an important task. That's the first step that you take after you decide that you want to pursue an LLM.
absolutely, Shireen. I think you need to just look at the cultural outlook of that university as well. So for me, George Washington has had like amazing amounts of scholars graduating who have really changed the policy, changed a lot of the way IP functions today. And some of them are like graduates from Jindal as well. So I had great examples to look up to. And also just George Washington really like celebrates each of yeah, like I think they really celebrate cultural diversities. Like we had this potluck kind of a thing, especially for the Indian students. We had a Diwali celebration, we had a Holi celebration. So all of these things kind of really contributed towards making that decision. And anyway, like I think I was just inclined to go to US from the beginning. Um, and yeah, so I think cultural diversity and cultural exposure was one of the like after, of course, the course curriculum, cultural exposure and cultural diversity was the second kind of criteria.
Of course, that's also an important criteria. I think what cut it for you from what you're saying is that your specialization and your desire to go to the US and experience the law school life there. So those are the two primary considerations. And likewise, anybody who's applying to a US to any law school in the world would have their own set of priorities. So there's no comprehensive list or there's no priority list on the basis of which you decide to pursue an LLM in a particular law school or from a particular country. But what is required essentially is that the purpose should be clear. Like your purpose is clear.
Absolutely.
You wanted to specialize in IP and you wanted to do it from the US. And therefore, then you checked out the law schools in the US and shortlisted your universities.
Yes.
I mean, it's going to be a hard decision, but it's a very important decision. And students, time and again, the kind of queries that we receive from JGLS students is largely pertaining to this, that where do I go? Why should I go to a particular country as opposed to the other? So when did you decide to do an LLM, Niharika, and how long before your application submissions did you prepare and plan? And be honest here, that how long did it take to prepare your applications?
Wow, that's actually a very very tough question. To be very honest, um so I was always into academics. I always wanted to get into like academic research, and so from the beginning that I knew that I kind of have want to do masters eventually, but I did not plan in terms of my timeline that should I do immediately after my graduation, or should I get some work experience and then go for my master's? Honestly, I was very confused on that aspect, and that kind of just got clearer as and when I did more internships, I researched more about the subject. So yeah, I think it was somewhere in my third year, actually second year in and third year starting, when I decided that it would be better if I go for my master's immediately after graduation. And by then, I kind of was certain that I wanted to specialize in intellectual property. And so yeah, and I just kind of knew that WorkX and intellectual property may not be like as relevant, or may not like help me too much in securing a position at a better law school. You know, for some courses, it's extremely important that you do get like a ground experience and then apply, because that really increases your chances for those courses. For intellectual property, I really didn't think that was needed. Um, and in terms of like timeline to start my application, it started somewhere like I intended to join in 2016 fall semester, and I think my application, the process properly started somewhere in 2014 and 2015 starting. That's when I started like um, researching on my universities, kind of jotting down, making notes, making my pro con list, making just the basic requirements, just the basic due diligence. And then when once that was in order, then I started applying for, you know, the other requirements, I think, which we will get to eventually. So yeah, I think 1.5 years of planning. Yeah.
You were pretty honest then, Niharika, and I can vouch for the fact that you were a brilliant student when you were at Jindal as well, and at least you were always interested in academia. And we'll come to that later. That when you were pursuing this LLM with the idea of becoming an academic yourself and using it for your research skills and for your research career, but you decided to become a lawyer and practice law. So we'll come to that later. That how your LLM can be useful in that regard as well.
Sure.
So what are some of the challenges, Niharika, that you faced while applying? And I'm sure you must have faced some of your own personal challenges in terms of applying, because it can become a tedious process. But if you could just articulate that for the students so that they can preempt the kind of challenges that they are going to face, and also offer some solution in terms of how you tackle those challenges. Yes.
Sure. So I did face a lot of challenges, and also because I started pretty early, and by then like not a lot of like my batchmates were starting to apply for masters themselves. So it was kind of something that I was doing it, but I was also doing it from my own research. In terms of logistics, I did have like a lot of challenges. Um, so so I think that you've already covered the UK application process in your previous webinar, but for US, there is a process of, or there's also an option of filing an application through LSAC. Now, LSAC is like a portal where you just like add universities to your account, and then you just apply through there. You upload your documents, you upload your application, you pay everything, and then that's the sorted kind of a thing. However, I did not know of that when I started. So it became kind of too overwhelming to see that, okay, well, I do want to apply to these 5 universities, but how do I start? Where do I start from? Like, I think that's where like was one of my major challenges in the beginning, that where do I start from? Like, do I focus on my letter of recommendation? Do I start my SOP? Do I give IELTS? Do I need to give IELTS? And, all of those things became really like I didn't know the answers to. So that kind of, like was very challenging for me. However, like, so I'll give the problem and the solution simultaneously. So the solution is to reach out to the best way to go about an LLM application is to reach out to someone who has already done it, and just like get like a basic idea of what you need, make a list of things that you need, and kind of like prioritize, ask for suggestions. And also it's very, very helpful, which is not so common in India currently, but I think it's picking up, is reaching out to the universities. So if you're not sure about any requirement, it's always better to just write to the university, they have like at least for George Washington, Miss Shanaz Joshi, she is actually from Bombay, and I really like emailed her about everything, like every kind of logistic issue that I had, and they're more than happy to help you out. They understand that the process is extremely challenging and can be overwhelming. So they're more than happy to like reach out and reply to your email and make sure that you're following the process correctly. So I think that's something that's the basic solution. But yeah, also do your own research, which kind of like you pick up and yeah. So and I think the other challenge was like once the basic list of requirements was sorted out for me, my other challenge was just to like coordinate like so statement of purpose are different for US and for UK. So the manner of writing and what they expect, what universities expect. So I think that was kind of tricky while like managing both UK applications and US applications, because when I was sitting down to write, I could just like have only one chain of thought. And so I had to like customize it according to UK to US. So that became challenging. And I think the solution for that will be to like focus on one country, finish it, and then like go to the other country. And I think the last will be to just coordinate a letter of recommendation. So the solution for that is like start from very early, like identify people you want letter of recommendations from, and then just like make sure that you're following the timeline.
I think those are some brilliant points you made there. And I would just like to pick up on two of them and reiterate them for everybody. So, firstly, the Law School Admission Council. So, they have a website. And you have to register on their website, and you have to get purchase certain services. And after that, what becomes accessible to you, and this is a very simplistic way of explaining it, what becomes accessible to you is that you can apply to any law school in the US through that common portal. So it's like a common portal. For example, if you have a statement of purpose that you've written for 5 law schools, now that's not a very good way of approaching law schools.
Yeah.
But you have a general statement of purpose that you want to send to 5 law schools. You can do that through the common. You can there's a checklist that you check, and that would be sent to those particular law schools, the same document. So, say you have a letter of recommendation. Now, letter of recommendations are going to be common. Unless you have mentioned the name of the law school within the letter of recommendation, you can assign it to 5 law schools simultaneously, 10 law schools. There's no limit. So, it's a way of making the application process to the law schools for the applicant as well as the university itself easier. So it's like the only portal through which you apply. Now, some of the universities also allow for applications through their own website and also paper applications. But paper applications are outdated. Nobody does it anymore. And once you purchase the LSAC, it becomes like a one-stop shop for your applications. So then what you do is you apply to US law schools through that. So it's very important to understand LSAC. And as Niharika said, that everybody in the system is there to support the student. So the best thing is if you're unclear about it and you've spoken to an alumni of that program and still you're unclear about it, you should write to the person who's designated to answer your queries. And believe me, and take our word, they are very responsive and they're very kind and they're very understanding, because they're dealing with students from all across the world. So they understand that maybe an information is not clear. And also the websites don't make it clear. The websites themselves are so convoluted to gather information from, that they understand that this is something that is required and students might have questions. So don't hesitate and just drop an email, and even call them. They will pick up your call and answer your queries very patiently. So those are some good advices that you have given everybody. So Niharika, now coming to the main question, and this is the make or break, right? So statement of purpose. All of us have struggled with it. Ashwati has struggled with it. I have struggled with it. You have struggled with it, and we know how difficult it is. It is easier said than done, and said than done. And even when you send it, you have doubts unless you get the admission in a particular university. You're always second guessing. Oh, I shouldn't have written that line, or maybe I should have deleted the paragraph. Oh, I didn't write about that achievement. Things like that. So, how do you come up with this statement of purpose, which is the most important perhaps the most important document that you're going to submit in support of your application for an LLM. So, firstly, introduce the statement of purpose to everyone, then tell us about your process, and third, what worked for you, and some things that you should totally not write in your SOP. Yes.
Sure. So statement of purpose is basically like, how in schools they used to say that write about yourself. It's just like, I think, more matured way of saying write about yourself and explain that why you are exactly like the word says, statement of purpose. Like, why do you like give us your statement of why you want to do this LLM? However, this is not as easy. You need to like take into consideration a lot of points that are very like centric to you. So no two statement of purposes will be alike. However, the intention behind the statement of purpose may be alike. We all want to get into the university. However, the reason behind the intention behind going to that specific university is very, very personal. It's very individualistic, and I think that's something that one should absolutely not lose track of while you're drafting. It's very easy to get dissuaded, and you might be thinking about a lot of like reading a lot of statement of purposes, and you may get like convinced that, oh, this one's better, this reasoning is better, but like don't lose track of why you want to do LLM. So I was actually speaking to someone a year back, one of my friends, a year back, and I remember having this discussion about statement of purpose, and we came up with this really like pointers kind of questions that one should absolutely answer in their statement of purpose. The first thing is, who am I? Like, just like a brief introduction about who you are, what do you do, just a little brief background about yourself. And it doesn't mean that I'm Niharika Malhotra residing in Delhi, but something more to it, something that goes beyond your CV. Now, I like to call the second part of it as the incident. So, like, there is a time in everyone's life when they decide to make that decision. So, that incident really is the main purpose of you wanting to do something. If you want to do, why do you want to do LLM? So for me, was when I was a teaching assistant, I really enjoyed teaching, and I realized that masters is the way forward for that. And that when I was teaching, it changed my outlook, it changed my process of thought. So that was the incident for me. So that the incident is different for everyone, and that's like the second part of the statement of purpose. The third part is that why LLM? Like, how is that the incident related to your master's? The next one is that why that university is important. Then, when you're convincing the university to take you, you also need to give the university that what additional quality, what additional factors are you getting on the table for the university? Are you going to make university proud? Like, that's like the basic gist of it. And last is the conclusion of, just requesting them to take you, and like with your final life goal sort of a thing in line with your purpose. So I think, that kind of covers the structure of the statement of purpose. It's very, I mean, it's easier, like Shireen said, it's easier said than done. I mean, you can't just like answer these questions in one line. You really, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of revision. So I actually spent 5 months only on my statement of purpose, editing it, re-editing it, asking friends, asking colleagues, asking my parents, asking seniors, asking professors who are writing letter of recommendations for me to read it, to review it, and just like keeping a track of everything that I am discovering about myself every day. So what I did was that I had this Word document where I used to just jot down my points. And once I started jotting down my points, it became easier, even for myself, to understand that why I want to do this. So I think every day, just like write something. The first draft will never be good anyway. So just like start somewhere. I would say just start somewhere. And yeah.
That's very good. Actually, you've given a checklist of what things should be included in the statement of purpose, and that's particularly important. You know, when I was researching for my book also, and I was speaking to a lot of applicants who had applied and successfully gained admissions, at that time, we also came up with a checklist of a similar kind, and exactly what you said, that everybody's statement of purpose is going to look different because everybody's life story is different, and their purposes are different, their goals are different, and therefore all of that has to come on paper through your statement of purpose, because the importance of statement of purpose is such that unlike any other admission, there's no interview, so you are communicating with the panel through that written piece of paper that has traveled so many miles to reach them, right?
Absolutely.
So
And I think, yeah, sorry.
no, it has to be taken very seriously. That's what I'm trying to say. And
Yes.
the way you said, the entire process is absolutely brilliant. First, you gather your thoughts, you prepare a checklist, you try and come up with the first draft, you share it with your friends and family, take the inputs, revise, edit till the time it seems perfect to you. And only then you send it across, because only then would it be impactful and would do justice to you as a person and your life's work. You were saying something, Niharika.
Yeah, in fact, like Carl Rustam Khan from your batch, Shireen, I remember speaking to him before I applied for my master's, and I remember him telling me that, Niharika, there are thousands of applicants. They read through so many statement of purposes. What what is Niharika's story? That's what they want to know.
Exactly.
What is your story? Why? And I mean, I think this is more applicable for UK than US and UK. US really gives importance to your extracurriculars. So, I mean, there is no harm in looping your hobby and the incident that I just discussed with your statement of purpose. It's very important to convey your story in a manner that nobody else has lived before. So,
Definitely. And it's the hardest to write about yourself. So, so there are some do's and don'ts that I would also like to share with the students. The first is that you start early, only then will you finish on time when it comes to your statement of purpose. And the second is prepare this checklist which Niharika has shared with you, and prepare your first draft in that sense. And the don't is, please don't copy and paste blindly from statement of purposes that you get from somewhere, or you copy and paste it from some internet source. These people who are going to assess your applications have developed a very fine eye of judging a candidate's seriousness and potential towards the LLM course. So if you can't write a 500 word or a 1,000 word essay, then how are you going to complete the essays that lie ahead of you in law school? So also when you're a law student and you're applying for the LLM, the level of English that they're expecting is much higher than the other courses, because that's what is expected. And you'll see it through your English language test requirements also, which come on later and are required to pursue your master's abroad. So, Niharika, that is one of the very important parts of an application. But then we know there are other parts that also create a lot of stress when you're applying. For example, securing the letters of recommendation, getting them in time. What should I write in my curriculum vitae, which would appeal to the panel? Then you have the application form, and there's some hidden questions within the application form which you see 1 or 2 days prior to your application submission, and then you panic about it. And now, what I should write about myself? I don't think I have any content left, or how do I paraphrase the content that is already there in the statement of purpose? And then, of course, you have the IELTS exam, which is not that difficult but has to be secured anyways. The grades have to be secured anyways in that, and the score for that matter, the test score for English language test requirements, and then the visa and all of that. But all of this has to be done in a timely manner, right? So how do you ensure that with your study, somebody who's studying and is planning to pursue his or her master's abroad, or when you're working, firstly, how do you ensure that you get everything in time to the university for them to make a fair assessment of their application? And second, what do you think are some of the, of course, I don't want you to elaborate much on it, but some of the do's and don'ts that worked for you when it comes to the curriculum writing, especially the letters of recommendation, application form, and then also getting a good score in your English language test examinations?
Sure. So I'll start with the LORs and then I'll go. So for LORs, so even for LORs, I think there are three types of LORs that I feel that you should definitely have. One is the person who really knows you. The other one is a known figure in the course that you're going to apply to. And thirdly, somebody who you have worked with closely professionally. And in case of law students, maybe someone whose courses you have repeatedly taken, who knows your academic, level analysis, who's reviewed your work continuously. So, and I actually I actually followed this process myself. So I had one LOR from, actually all of them were from professors at JGLS, and of course because I did not have work experience. So one of them was from a professor who I was a teaching assistant to, one professor who was a known figure in the intellectual property, and one who was actually an alumni of GW. And for others, apart from GW, was a person whose courses I had repeatedly taken. So something when you are so letter of recommendations are not just them stating that, well, this person is really good, you should take them. It's also about that extra mile that they are about to write for you, to just give them a brief background about you. You know, when you're going to talk about yourself in the statement of purpose, you need someone to back you up with. Like Shireen mentioned, there's no interview. They don't do background checks per se. So this is the kind of background check that they are going to follow. So it's always better to make it more impactful. And a lot of LORs come. I mean, if you search on Google right now, sample LOR, there'll be thousands. But like the statement of purpose is very individualistic. LORs can also be very like individual specific. Uh, so it should convey that they truly know you in whatever capacity, but they truly do know you. They have seen your work. And I would say that SOP and LORs really go hand in hand. So when you are about to start with your SOPs, identify the people you want to take your LORs from. Like from the beginning, have a conversation with them. And it's always better not just to go walk up to them and be like, okay, I need an LOR from you. Discuss your options with them, discuss what your goal is. You don't want someone to write something for you that they don't believe. So have that discussion with them much in advance in your application, and understand that what they're going to write and what your goals are all aligned. So if you want to do something related to academics, make sure that they do talk about your academic skills, your research skill, your analytical skills. So these are just the key words that even the the committee will be looking at while making the selection process. And yeah, the other thing is that it's always better to give your statement of purpose, just even the bare bones of your statement of purpose to the person you're requesting to write your LOR for, just so that they also know what your goals are. So I think these two are the most important things for LORs, in my opinion.
Certainly. And what about the curriculum writing?
So for US, actually, CV format is extremely different of what we follow in India. And I got to know much later when I started applying for my jobs at career fairs in the US. So in the US, they really want you to distinguish. So they consider your internship experience as also your work experience. So make sure that you just don't ignore your internship experience. That's one thing that I didn't know. I learned much later when in like my course. So that's one major difference. So make sure that you just don't write anything in your internship experience. Make sure that you present it well as well. Of course, if you have like 5 years, 6 years of work experience, you will obviously have much more to say about your work than your internship. But if you're currently a law student planning to apply, do mention about your internships in your CV that are actually like impactful. Yeah, I think that's one of the major difference. But and in the US, people are very they believe in bullet points. They want everything to be like one line or very concise. They just want to read and be done with it. So, like if if I want to say that I have drafted cease and desist notices, it should really say drafted cease and desist notice. They really don't want to know the subject matter of the cease and desist notice, whether it was pertaining to infringement or passing off. It was just drafted cease and desist notices. So it has to be like as concise, as like crisp as possible. So yeah, make your CV very like, don't make it too long. One pager should be enough for someone who's in law school right now. It can go up to two if you have work experience, but I don't think they really don't appreciate long CVs. That's my.
Yeah, of course. And are there any questions that you answered in the application form? Because some of these US law schools do have questions hidden within the application form. Yes.
I
did.
did.
From my application to Columbia, and then I've gotten an admission, and I got the Human Rights Fellowship and Jagdish Bhagwati Fellowship also that time. But I thought that the process was quite tedious. So that's why I want people to know about this hidden questions within the application form.
Yes, so I actually, so it was not with George Washington. George Washington did not have like the hidden questionnaires. The process there was fairly simple. But I did answer questions for Duke University and I think for UC Berkeley. So they had questions in terms of like summarizing my statement of purpose in one line. So it was like the first question was, what are your short-term goals? Second question was, what are your long-term goals? Third question was what are your strengths and what do you do to overcome your weaknesses? So like these were literally those questions that an interviewer may ask you. So it was more like that. So yeah, like again, like it has to be very concise, and I think the trick to cracking these questions has to be that you need to be clear in your head of what you want to say. And again, like they really don't care about too much about flowery language. They want things that are very like to the point, very crisp. So easiest way will be to read the question, think about it, process it, write down your bullet points, go back to it, take few days, go back to it, and then like prepare your answers. It shouldn't be long. It shouldn't be like flowery. Like I said, it shouldn't be like a page long. It can be like 5-6 lines, but very impactful. So yeah, but there are hidden questions and they do like give weightage to that.
Certainly, thank you for that. And I think those are very valid points that have been made for every aspect of the application process. My 2 pence on the CV would be that, of course, be concise, and as Niharika said, also make sure that you don't put everything in anything that you have done in your life in your CV. You have to really customize it according to the program that you're applying to. So if you have a choice between talking about a moot court competition that you did in intellectual property rights when you're applying for an LLM in IP law, you should choose that over, say, some volunteering activity that you have done elsewhere, because you have limited space, and they also want to see whether you're able to prepare a document which is sensible to the purpose for which it is going to be used. With CV, that is very important. Another thing, Niharika, which you said and people miss out, is that the format is very important, especially when you're applying to law schools, because format is key in a lawyer's life as well. We're always searching for the format and then putting in information within that format. So they take format, font size, believe you me or not, very seriously. So that's a part of your research, that what kind of format you are going to follow, what kind of a font style and size you are going to use, because that really makes your document readable, and it also shows the effort that the student has gone through in order to find the correct way of submitting and preparing and submitting a document. With respect to letters of recommendation, what I admired about what you said is that you have to speak to your referee, and you have to also take your reference from somebody who knows you. Otherwise, what are they going to write? And it's not going to come through in the paper that they know you and that you have worked with them and they're speaking from their heart. They should really be speaking from their heart when they're writing your recommendation. And one of the good things to do with letters of recommendation is that even if you're just thinking about the applying for an LLM in a particular year, right in the beginning of the year, you should write to your referee and request them for the letter, because they might promise somebody else, and then later on you might lose out on a excellent recommendation. Also, any referee that you approach would first ask you for your CV and first draft of your statement of purpose. So only when you're ready with it, you ask them to start the process of drafting your letters of recommendation, which also becomes absolutely important. Another trick that I would like to share with students in terms of the letter of recommendation itself is that if you have 3 letters of recommendation, make sure that all the 3 talk about different aspects of your profile. So one letter of recommendation, and I'm sure that's what Niharika also followed, that one should talk about maybe your academics, how are you as a student in class. The other one can talk about your extracurricular achievements. The last one can talk about your volunteering activities. So different facets of your personality, because you're trying to put a person together in their mind before they make a decision whether you're suitable for studying at a particular law school or not. And as I said, the questions in the application form are also particularly important. Don't be in the impression that they don't review it. They do. They review everything that you say, because that's the process that they follow. So Niharika, so we have heard about everything, just about everything in terms of applying to George Washington, how great George Washington is. So now please share with students your experience of actually getting there, and did it match the expectation? And what are the things that you carried back to India from George Washington and have stayed with you throughout?
Sure. So I think it absolutely met with my expectations. I so actually another thing that that I before I like share my experience was that I had already researched a lot about on the professors and the courses that they offer. That's another thing of shortlisting, that also like review professors that are part of the of that university, and read upon their work. It really, you will be really surprised to know that that's what really attracts you to that university, that the specialist professor is there. So for example, I was really drawn to the Duke University because of Professor James Boyle. He's a professor who has written about copyleft a lot and open source, and I was extremely like, I only applied to Duke because of him. So you I mean, you have to see what like how many professors are there, what kind of professors are there, and what kind of courses they offer to really shortlist. So yeah, so my experience at George Washington was really good because I knew what I wanted to do. And also, apart from that, I think the entire experience of me reaching there, finding an apartment for myself, my first grocery shopping, and all of that was amazing. And like right now, when I'm reliving it, it's kind of interesting, and really like one of the best periods of my life. What I got from George Washington was just to understand a subject so closely and then be able to practice it. I don't think that I would have really gotten a chance to study so many different aspects of intellectual property at one single place. Um, and of course, like what I carried back was that I had learned how to cook, and I still cook. So that was like one of my major um, things that I got back from my LLM experience.
Yes, of course, that's a very important life skill, and also, that indicates that you were able to grow in life, not only professionally but personally as well, because you start taking those responsibilities more seriously when you're alone, and you don't have anybody, you don't have that kind of a support system that you might have in India. So you start
Absolutely.
appreciating those things as well.
Yes,
And we can see how George Washington, just the name brings a smile on your face. So
absolutely.
it's a good
I
experience. It must be a great experience for you. So, Niharika, another question, and then we'll move on to the questions answers, because we have a lot of questions from the students themselves, the attendees themselves. So, another question that I want to ask you is really that students get stressed about employment opportunities, and of course, after the pandemic, and we're still going through the pandemic, there might be a
Right.
lot of doubts in the minds of the students that even if they complete an LLM, what are the kind of opportunities that are available in the US, and how easy or difficult it is to secure those opportunities. So, what is your view about it?
So it was so for lawyers, you need to understand that we are like law is very territorial in nature, so you will always have that hindrance of bar exam, and that is despite like I mean, if this was a hurdle even before COVID. Um, so so my intention throughout was not to stay back, and so I never like applied for bar. and did not take bar exams. But in case like someone is going with an intention to like settle in the US or anywhere for that matter, make sure that you do comply with bar rules. So there are some mandatory courses that you are required to take. If you take those courses, you meet those credits so that you're eligible to sit for bar exam. Once you are eligible, you study for those subjects and you sit for the bar exam, and well, you prepare for it, and hopefully you clear it. And of course, like so US, so each state has different bar exams. So depends on what state you want to go to. Will really depend on your career opportunities as well. So, for example, for IP, New York and actually in the East Coast it's New York, and on the West Coast it's of course the entire California region, which is like the hot hub for IP professionals. So it's so if you're going there for with an intention to like get employment, make sure that you do factor that into your decision making, your shortlisting. So, for example, if you do want to like become an entertainment lawyer and practice in the West Coast, make sure that you do like apply very seriously to the West Coast University so that they help you prepare for the bar, and then you clear it, and they will always prefer a graduate of a West Coast university, the prospective employers. And so all of these considerations you need to keep in mind before you apply, because they are going to have like a long-term effect. For me, it was a very different, because I was studying in Washington and then I moved to California for my fellowship. But that also happened because actually before that story, I'll get to the second point. The second point is that in the US, people really give a lot of importance to networking and your LinkedIn profile. Like those two are the like I mean, you don't even need to like send in your CV if your LinkedIn profile is perfect. So for every application, that you may come across on LinkedIn, they have that option of easy apply. So you just share your LinkedIn profile to them, and that's how they review you, and they possibly call you for an interview. The other thing is the networking events. In the US, especially for LLM, universities understand that you just have 1 year. It's not like a 3 year program. It's a 1 year program, and you have very limited time to like factor in everything. You study, you network, you also prepare for your bar exam. So they organize these networking events, usually during the evening, where they call like prospective employers, prospective partners from really good law firms, just as an informal event where you meet them, where you have drinks with them, and just like share things about. So the key to crack these networking events is to have like your so this I was recommended much later after I graduated, is to have like your small visiting card kind of a thing, wherein you just like give your email ID, your specialization, something distinct about yourself, so that they carry that with themselves. And you share that on your networking events, and you also ask for their visiting card. After the networking event, that's where the real work starts. Email each of those people you've met, pick up one anecdote from your conversation, factor that in the email and send it to them, so that they remember you, who you are, and they might consider you. So it's not very easy to get it. But like do mention that you're preparing for the bar exam and so on and so forth. So these networking events can be very, very fruitful if you have that inclination of staying back and working. And so now my story. So when I was about to graduate from George Washington, I came across this fellowship opportunity from Wikipedia on LinkedIn, and I just like easy apply. I applied, and you'll be really surprised. I never took LinkedIn very seriously before that. And he actually wrote to me that, we are interested in, after looking at your profile, we're interested. Can you send us the statement of purpose of why you want to be a fellow, and so on and so forth. So do take your LinkedIn profile very seriously. I I mean, and George Washington actually had like a separate wing of within the career development program. There was a different wing for LinkedIn profiles where there used to be people who used to sit with you and like make your LinkedIn profile more attractive to employers. And they used to tell us features about LinkedIn that were, I mean, they were not known to me. So yeah, these are some things for to look out for and to factor in when you are applying for your LLM with a with the aim to get a job there.
That are very valuable insights, Niharika. That the two key takeaways from what you've said is that you have to network, take your social media seriously, especially your LinkedIn, and also make a plan, make a strategic plan even before you arrive in the US in terms of where you are headed after your LLM, because that's the kind of time that you will take to build contacts, to make your presence felt, and how to act in a networking event is also absolutely essential. And what do you do in terms of follow up? So these are very important tips that you have given to the attendees today. And in fact, what is of most significance is that just apply. You know, one doesn't have to fear the
Exactly.
result. I spoke to one of my friends, and they said that they had applied to about 100 law firms before they got into the law firm that they are
Absolutely.
working. And she wasn't kidding; she did that kind of work.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of work it takes. So what comes out from what you've said is that there are job opportunities available. It's not that you cannot land a good job in the US. It's available, but you need to be strategic and you need to network and you need to use social media to the best of your advantage for securing those jobs. Lastly, before we move on, of course, we are way above time now, but it's okay. I think we can take 10-15 minutes more for the questions. So, how did you finally decide to become a practicing lawyer as opposed to joining academia? What was that deciding point on that crossroads of deciding your decision, deciding your career after your LLM?
So, so actually, the good thing about my LLM coursework was that it was not just academic. To my surprise, there were a lot of courses that were very like practical in nature. You know, things that really give you an edge, especially in terms of drafting, as compared to others. You know, so I think that kind of really helped me. And when I started applying that to my job, I just realized that practicing is like gives me more happiness and gives me more satisfaction. And I think yeah, that's really. I mean, I'm not completely averse to academic now. Also, I keep writing now and then, but yeah. Um,
That's a good factor to consider when you're choosing your career. Apart from the popular choices, of course, litigation or practicing law is a very popular choice these days. But that shouldn't be the only factor. Something like
Absolutely.
happiness and satisfaction are key, but that you realize only later in life. So now I'm going over to Ashwati and she's going to ask you questions. So Ashwati is a lecturer at Jindal Law School and she's also the assistant dean at Office of Career Services and she's an integral member of CASHL. So over to you, Ashwati, for all the lovely questions that the attendees have asked of Niharika.
Thank you, Shireen. So nice of you. Also, thank you so much, Niharika. I feel like I've just relived my entire LLM experience through what you've just shared with us. We
So
have a
Ashwati
few.
herself is from University College London.
Yes, thank you. So we have a bunch of questions, and I'll go in a chronological order. So the first one is kindly share a list of if there's any specific list on LSAC, and I think I'll take it up, and then maybe you can add as well. I think the list for a particular university is very specific to each university, so it's not like there's a set list. Probably the most common could be the SOP, the CV, and the LORs, but maybe you can add as well. Was there something specific that you had to add to your list on LSAT?
No. So no, actually that pretty much covers up. But like some universities also give you an option that if you don't want to like take IELTS or TOEFL, you can probably like give a certificate from the registrar that that you know your university education was from a was English medium. Apart from, I mean, those are again like very university specific. So if you're applying to a university where they do not accept that certificate, you will have to sit for IELTS. But yeah, apart from that, there is no like uh, checklist that's like common to all except these three things.
Okay. The next question is, do you know how long an ideal SOP should be? I was told it shouldn't be more than 200, sorry, 2 pages long. Maybe Shireen can add in as well because she's written a book and she's obviously the expert over here and she has a little more to share.
I would pose all questions to Niharika. She's an expert. So, Niharika, over to you. Yes.
So it again, it depends on. So a lot of universities give you like a word limit that your SOP shouldn't exceed 500 words. So Duke University asked me to write my SOP in 300 words. That was like the toughest task ever. Yeah, ideally, like if you don't have like any word limit, ideally it shouldn't be more than 1.5 page, because even they, I mean, like again, going back to this, that they receive thousands of applications. You need to realize that you can't exaggerate more. I think things that you want to say can be fit into 1.5 pages. Yeah. But Shireen, please feel free to uh, agree, disagree, or add.
So, if you insist, so basically, when you start with your statement of purpose, and customization is key. Even if you are applying to 10 different universities, make sure they don't figure that you apply to 10 different universities. And the way of doing that is to include the names of the faculty members, the courses that you want to pursue, the research centers that you want to join. Now, having said that, the first draft that you prepare will go to about 2000 words, even 2500 words, and then you start editing it, it'll come down to 1000 words. So I don't know of any university that asks you for a statement of purpose for more than 1,000 words. So that becomes your key document, and then you can alter it according to the word limit set by each university. So suppose somebody might ask you for 500 words, somebody might ask you for 300 words, somebody might ask you for 750 words, but nobody is going to ask you less than 300 words. So those are the versions that you would have to prepare. And the key to reducing the words is not to delete all the other paragraphs, but to convey the same information in fewer words. And that is hard. I know that's hard, but that is the editing process. Sometimes students think that editing means that I'll remove the middle two paragraphs and my job is done. That is not the case. You have to convey the same thing in lesser words. That means you keep reading your SOP, and this is something that somebody had shared with me once, and it saved my life. You keep reading your document again and again and again, and try and convey the same meaning in lesser words. You can write the same thing in 1,000 words, and you can write the same thing in 300 words. That's the beauty of the English language. So you have to really spend time with your SOP and try and convey the same meaning in lesser words. That's the trick. Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen, and thank you, Niharika. I think those are some brilliant points. And the next question, I'm particularly intrigued myself when you said that the SOP was quite different when you applied to the US universities as opposed to the UK universities. So, can you just shed some light on that, please?
Yeah. So, so in a lot of UK universities, I think this was University of Leeds or this was Manchester, where they had like given the pointers of what exactly you need to write in your SOP, and that's when I realized that there's actually a difference between what US universities expect out of it or out of an SOP over UK universities. And one of the stark differences was that I think US universities pay equal weightage to your extracurriculars. So they do not just want your statement of purpose to be academic. And I mean, you need to realize that LLM is an academic degree, right? So US universities also give weightage to what you have done extracurricular in your, as your extracurricular, and how that applies to your statement of purpose. On the other hand, UK, I think, focuses more towards your academic qualifications, your academic goals, your academic view, basically, and how your courses are going, and why are you applying, and what courses really intrigue you. And I think that's not kind of squarely applicable for the US SOPs. I felt that while I was drafting my UK SOPs were more academic, centric as compared to US, which were more like just overall like my belief of why LLM.
All right, thank you. So I think the next question is something that we at Casual get a lot, and that is to do with how important is the ranking of the university. So is there a specific ranking that you refer to, or is QS the only ranking that we should look at? Should we look at rankings of the universities, or should we also go one step further and look at subject specific rankings? Or it's not just law but like specializations within law as well. So
Yeah.
a little on that, please.
So honestly, I did choose George Washington because it's one of the top rankings for intellectual property. But having said that, my first qualifying factor was not that George Washington is a ranking university. So there is no like specific ranks that I honestly followed or still follow. I think the good way of looking at things will be your intention. If your intention is to kind of get like a brand value on your CV, then I think you should really look at the rankings of overall university. Of course, then your Ivy Leagues will come, and then you see the course that really attracts. However, if you're just going with an intention to like study more about the subject, read more about the subject, then I would say look at course specific rankings, read up about the courses, and then make a decision. I also got through Benjamin Cardozo, and I have to admit that I chose George Washington over Benjamin Cardozo because George Washington was a better ranking university, and I knew that if I'm going to come back to India, I needed that additional brand on my CV for intellectual property. So that's how I made a decision in terms of rank as well as the course.
That is very true, in fact. And just to add, I think also but you can't entirely rely on the ranks as well. You can probably speak to the alumni and see if they are on the same page and you're getting what you expect. The other thing is, how did you access the how do you assess a university's cultural outlook? Because you said that was one of your key elements that made you choose
Right.
this particular university. So
I mean, first is I joined a Facebook group, and that kind of like gave me a lot of insight. And also, these were the questions that I did like ask the admissions committee over the email, and also the mixers. The mixers. Actually, I should have covered that earlier. That a lot of universities have mixers. I don't know, because of COVID, they may not have it currently, but they may have online mixers. So what they do is that just before their admissions open for the next semester, they usually send their representatives to India, and specifically Delhi. Delhi itself holds a lot of mixers, and they invite like prospective people who have approached them, and just to like get a feel of them. And a lot of people actually get admissions through those mixers as well. And those were the questions that I had asked them that time. And I also spoke to alumni there. So I literally stalked the alumni on LinkedIn, on Facebook. A lot of them were my seniors from JGU as well. So that really helped. Just like speaking to them, asking my questions, that kind of made me judge the cultural outlook of the university. Yeah, basically just ask a lot of questions to everyone.
right, thanks on that. So I think the next question is something the three of us discussed yesterday, and that's to do with how can we use the LSAC portal and how are you able to tailor your documents as per the universities. So maybe you want to share what you shared with us yesterday.
Sorry, your voice broke in between.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
So the next question is something we discussed, you, Shadeen, and I discussed yesterday over our call, and that's to do with how can we use the LSAC portal and how do you tailor your documents as per the university requirements?
How do I access LSAC portal? Is just you create an account, and you shortlist the universities that you want to. You basically add them to your profile, and then within the university profile, you'll find like a checklist, kind of things that they want you to do, and yeah, you like just upload them. I mean, I don't know how to explain without really like sharing screen, but like
So
I think
Niharika,
the
I'll just stop you there for a second. So basically, the student is asking that though this is a common portal and we can assign documents to put to all universities, like if you have
okay,
one
now I
document,
can
one
see the
template,
question.
then
Yeah,
how do you customize those applications
sure.
at the same? There, the student got confused. Yes,
Okay, yeah. So
you can answer.
yeah. So you can, so you will still have to, so you just don't apply like one, you just don't upload one document and click apply to all. You still have to like manually upload for each university, and that's how you tailor it. And also in terms of like how do you draft and how do you tailor SOPs, that will that again like depends. So what I did was that my first few paragraphs were common to all, in terms of like who am I and the incident, and why the university, and why why me for the university, and the conclusion changed. And yeah, so like I had that bullet points in my mind, that what, and that went back to the pro con list that I had made when I decided to do LLM. So yeah, I think that's how I tailored it and factored that into my SOPs.
Yeah.
I hope I got the question right. I'm still confused about the question.
No, I think you answered that perfectly. And thank you for pitching in, Shireen. So basically, just it's very university specific, as we were mentioning. So
Right.
it's not a one document upload to all,
Absolutely.
like you mentioned. Again, there's a choice that you can make while uploading
And
itself.
you should make, actually,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Right. So the next question is, how do you assess which universities you might actually get into? So, a realistic shortlist.
So, like I had like, so my parents and I had prepared these universities that were like reach, and then there was safety, and then there was someone which we were not sure about whether I will be able to get in or not. So how do I assess that was my academic standing, because I did not have any work experience to back me up. So my academic standing, and also how much I was convinced, like when you're drafting LOR, when you're drafting SOPs, that this university is right for you or not. That kind of place. And actually, one of the things I played was extremely safe. I played really safe. I only applied to universities which I knew like I will get into. So yeah, I think I'm the wrong person to ask this question, because I didn't take enough risk while applying.
No, but what you said was fair enough, because once one of my faculty told me there's a dream list, there's an achievable list,
Exactly.
and there's a backup list. So having these three categories really helps. The
Yeah.
next one is also something quite important. So considering how much the result declaration dates vary from university to university, how do you figure out whether to accept an admission or go ahead with it, or wait for the results of another university you've applied to? How do you sort of decide how to go about it?
Yeah, this is a very anxious kind of a thing. This has induced anxiety in me. What if like I'm not able to accept this university offer on time while waiting for the other university? So the best way to go about is to actually be very honest to the admissions committee. So I actually wrote to one of the admissions committee that thank you for the offer. It was a very flattering email that way, that I'm really super delighted. And then I wrote to them requesting for an extension of my decision making, and wrote to the other university that if I could, be informed about their decision about pertaining to my application a little sooner. And you won't believe, they are extremely sweet. They also know that you have applied to a lot of universities, and usually March, April is the time when a lot of universities give out results, and they ask then, and you're supposed to accept it. So they also know that the timelines are tight. So it's always better to just approach them and request for extension.
All right, thank you. So the next one is more specific to funding. So how can one fund their study abroad in the US? And what scholarship options are there for those who go directly after, completing, say, an undergraduate degree? And if
Sure.
someone takes an education loan for it, do you think one gets such a return of doing an LLM once, once they come back? And that's a very difficult question. I agree.
Yeah. So regarding financial aid in the US, it's so there are two types of financial aid: merit-based and need-based. So a lot of universities provide. So they have different like scholarships for need-based and merit-based. Some of them are hybrid. So it's always better to like check the university requirements for that. Some would want you to make a part of the reason you want the scholarship within the SOP. Some may want you to write a complete different statement of purpose why you deserve the scholarship. And and I would say that if you do have like an option, just apply it. You'll be really surprised that sometimes you get scholarships where you least expect it from. And if it's need based, you really need to like put that across that it is actually need based, and especially for someone who is goes immediately after graduation. It's mostly need based unless and until you were like a top achiever, and so you should apply for both anyway. And about taking a loan, again it depends on the kind of career path you choose after you come back. I personally, like, thanks to my parents, I personally did not take a student loan. But I think you eventually get like the returns. That I think that's what you asked.
Yes.
The returns, yes.
Niharika. That's a wonderful way of putting it. So don't look at LLM as a profit and loss statement. That if
Exactly,
I
yeah.
invest this much, then in the next 3 years I have to recover my LLM money. Look at it from the perspective of, firstly, try and secure a scholarship, because scholarships are not only merit based, but they are merit come needs based also. So sometimes they'll ask you for your financial statements in terms of ITR returns, especially for financial aid. But many of the scholarships, and do your thorough research, and that's why begin early when you're talking about LLM admissions, because otherwise you lose on the financial help that you can get. And there's a myth that all of those are based on your need based, and slightly privileged people will not apply. That's not true. Many of these scholarships which are fully paid, which include airfare and all of those things, like Fulbright for that matter, include are for merit-based students, which means that they're meritorious scholarships. They will not ask you about your financial condition. So do apply for them. For example, Felix, NLAX is a very good example of fully paid scholarships for US law schools. You might want to check out that. So we have a lot of questions, so we can't take all of them. We're going to take the last two questions, Ashwati, and because Niharika also has a meeting after this and she has to get to that. So let's take the next two questions, and let's keep it open. Niharika, are you open to answering those questions on email? We'll send it to you through Casual and you can answer those questions.
Absolutely. You can share my email ID as well. I'll be more than happy to speak to students. And
wonderful, how lovely.
whichever
So
way I can.
Niharika, so all your questions will be answered. It's just that we can only take limited questions now. We've already gone a little overboard with respect to time, but we will certainly make an effort to answer all of those questions that you're posing on the chat. So don't worry about it. Yes, Ashwati, the last two questions, and then we'll close the webinar.
So the next question is, can one intern during their time at law school in the US?
Yes, they can. You will have to. So in the US there is so there are some work restrictions in terms of hours that you can put in because you're on a student visa, and so there are some restrictions on that. But if you do intern, the employer do make sure that your employer knows that you're on F1 visa, and there are some tax compliances that you take care of. But yes, there are internship opportunities, and sometimes there are opportunities to intern within the university as well. That you can work with professors, you can work for a center, and they do like give you reward you either in money or credit. So it is possible to intern.
All right, then I think we're down to the last question. So I think it comes, it's just something that it's like a follow-up question. And this Akshaya is asking you whether you said we'll have to make sure universities you apply to need not know about the other universities you're applying to. But what if the online application has a question on it asking if you have applied or planning to apply to other universities and name them? Do you say you're planning on applying to other universities or otherwise? So I think if I remember right, they do ask you, are you applying elsewhere? And that's just a checkbox, but you
Right.
don't necessarily have to
Yeah.
name, right?
Right. Yeah. And also, like when I think when Shireen said that you don't need to make the universities know that you're applying to other universities, I think she meant more of a copy paste job. That it shouldn't be that you're talking about some professor that is in George Washington and that gets carried forward to your SOPs for Duke University. So like just be careful in terms of that. And also, I mean, it's okay if other universities know, like they are also considering other applicants. So it's okay if they know.
Right. Thank you so much. I think that would be it. Over to you, Shireen.
Thank you, Ashwati, for taking that session up, and thank you, Niharika, for taking out the time to share your wonderful experiences of applying for admissions to US law schools. You very patiently took the everybody through that journey, that entire journey of applying to US law schools, and also shared your valuable experience and were pretty honest about the rigors of the application process and shared some practical tips which I'm sure are going to benefit the prospective applicants to US law schools, and they will be able to get to their dream law school. What really struck me in the conversation that we had today, that you were pretty serious about the application itself and you did the work to get that admission, which means that your research was on point. And that was really refreshing to hear from you in terms of how you not only spoke to the people who had applied to the particular university that you were aiming at, but you also thoroughly went to the website, were keen on understanding even the formats that are applicable to a particular university, and you got all of those things right. And then there's no surprise that you actually got to the top law school and you also completed your LLM in a very good manner. So we wish you all the very best with respect to your professional journey ahead. We are already very proud of you as a JGLS alumna because you have done well for yourself. You have taken up opportunities and you have made your dreams become a reality. And we hope those keep coming true as you go forward, you tread ahead in your professional path. But keep coming back and sharing your wealth of experience with the students at JGLS and with the JGU community at large, because this is also very important. This sharing of information is very important because once you've arrived at the destination, all you can do is share your knowledge and wisdom with everybody else. And this is very important work that you've done today, and you've contributed back to your alma mater in a very big way. And we will be forever grateful for your contribution to OP Jindal Global University. So, to the audience, thank you so much for asking such lovely questions. We are sorry we couldn't take all of them, but we did try to take most of them up. And we promise you that if you write to us at cashel@edu.in, I've put it on the chat. If your question was unanswered, it will be answered through email. Please be patient, but we will certainly connect with Niharika and we'll ask her to reply to those questions. Thanks, Ashwati, again for being so lovely as always. And closing remarks, Niharika, and then we can close the session for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was indeed a wonderful experience, and I think I can almost like relive my when I was talking about those struggles, those thrills, that the excitement of first offer letter, like my email box. Congratulations, Niharika. Like, that feeling. I relive that, and thank you so much for making me do this. It was really a great experience. For the students, I'd just like to say, just be true to yourself. Like just don't follow the path because I mean, LLM is not just the way forward. Like, research why LLM, why do you want to do it, and what are you going to make of it, you know? And yeah, just enjoy life. And remember, LLM is not just about academics, it's about your overall development, going to a different country, managing things by yourself. All of those are equally successful and really helpful in your professional life. So even if, you think that LLM is about academics, it's not just that. And yeah.
Wonderful. How wonderful, Niharika. It was so lovely to connect with you again after so many years.
I know, same here.
Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good evening. And the webinar for today has ended. Thank you.